Okay. So welcome to the Altered Attitudes podcast, brought to you by East Coast Recovery Online, an addiction treatment centre based in the east of England. This episode is sponsored by Rehabs UK, the definitive place to go to find rehabilitation treatment and advice. And today's the first remote podcast, so bear with us. Hopefully it all records nicely and it all looks good. It's not going to be quite the same as being in the studio together, but this is exciting because it means that we can start to talk to people from further afield, which is good. All right, so in today's episode we're going to be it's going to be great. So in today's episode we're going to be taking a deep dive into the ideas behind zero alcohol drinks. And, so not like soft drinks like Pepsi or Sprite, although maybe we can touch on like caffeinated drinks. But the drinks that emulate like beers, wines and spirits, so you get the kind of 0% beers and what have you. So as someone who's not in recovery or an addict, they work for me, they're great. In the summer when it's hot outside and I fancy a beer after work, if you have a beer, one can often lead to another. Even if you're not an addict and you can stop, you can still find yourself drinking more than you expected. But a non-alcoholic beer for me, one will usually do the job. I don't know how that works, but it seems to kind of satiate me without me wanting more. So there's obviously a place for these sorts of products on the market. But when you look at it from the perspective of an alcoholic, I'm guessing things change. It becomes it's a different kettle of fish, so to speak. So I wondered, what are the dangers of these types of drinks? Because does it trigger memories? Is it to do with an allergy? Is it a good idea to drink beers labelled as non-alcoholic if you're in recovery? What's your take on that, Lester?
Well, it's always been a bit controversial. I mean, as a beer drinker yourself, do you think it tastes any good?
Some of them can taste pretty good, yeah. As long as they're cold enough. Some of them do taste crap, though, don't get me wrong. But
I mean, when I was first sort of aware of them, I was still drinking. That was over 30 years ago. And I used to go in a pub that I used to get pretty legless in. And I found out that after I'd stopped drinking years later, that once they see I got so drunk, they would start giving me, it was on the tap, they would start giving me that lager instead of the alcohol one, so I didn't know the difference. But I think in recovery, it's always sort of been a bit of a controversial subject. But I think, like you actually mentioned, I didn't really think of that when you asked, if we could do a talk on this today. But again, I think even some of them so-called soft drinks are pretty damaging as well, probably even more so than the alcoholic-free lagers. But I guess sort of starting from the alcoholic-free lager, I'd always probably what would be more psychological point of view than anything would spring to my mind, that, I'd always question, why would you want to drink an alcoholic-free lager when you're an alcoholic or you're somebody that can't drink? Again, there's these funny little situations that you kind of get, and I guess in the mind of an alcoholic and addict, it might be different from your regular folk, but there's always this sort of lots of controversy. I can't say the word, controversy. There's always a lot of controversy around, people that drink, can they use marijuana? People that take drugs, can they use alcohol? And so there's this whole, and again, there's always the argument, well, there's no one answer to fit everybody, and I guess that's true, but there probably is one answer to fit each individual, and if you get that answer wrong, you're in. So I'm always astounded, and this is a little bit off the subject, but I think it's all in the same sort of ballpark. I'm always astounded why somebody, say, with a heroin addiction. Now, I was talking to the guy yesterday about the chemsex, and one of the concerns is that people don't understand what a traumatic experience the addiction is, and what people have to go through, the terrible traumatic experiences that they have to go through. And it's the same like with a heroin addiction. I mean, people are going through some pretty traumatic experiences, never mind what got them started on the drugs, but actually being on the drugs is a very degrading and very traumatic and fearful and abusive and demoralizing. And it's, you're going to have to do things that are shocking and shameful and just terrible. It's just a terrible, terrible life experience. And you'd think that people would want to do everything to escape it. So when they come into recovery, and I'd say the biggest school of thought in recovery or abstinence recovery is that any substances and certain behaviours are going to lead you back to addiction. So it's always a bit astounding to me that somebody with a heroin addiction, and again, because we do see quite a few people that come off heroin but carry on drinking alcohol and then they end up back on heroin because they're drunk. It reduces your capacity, your mental capacity, and your rational mind can reduce greatly when you're drinking alcohol. It's mind altering. So, a lot of guys that drink alcohol can end up back on heroin again. So we recommend, look, you might not have had an alcohol problem, but if you start substituting alcohol for drugs, and again, I think there's a great case in Amy Winehouse. When I listen to her story from my point of view, that, I remember her dad saying in an interview that, he was glad that she beat her heroin addiction before she died, but she didn't really beat it. She was drinking bottles of vodka that killed her.
Different substance, but still an addiction.
Yes, and equally as dangerous. So, you're kind of looking for that in people. So whereas it may be true that maybe some people who have a heroin addiction, maybe alcohol hasn't been a problem to them, but it could certainly become a substitute. And then the increase can happen and back. And again, I think the problem is you can't say that's the same for everybody. And it's like, well, that's true. But if you think about it, if somebody says it possibly could lead you back, even the fact that you'd be willing to try it tells me there must be something wrong with you.
Yeah, it's not worth the risk at all, is it?
Well, I think if I took you as a normal bloke and shot you up with heroin and made you be a prostitute for about 4 or 5 years, kicked all your teeth out, put you in prison, threw you behind Sainsbury's and slept in a car park under a box for a few years, and then finally said, all right, Matt, we're going to stop shooting you up with heroin now. But got to tell you, mate, if you drink alcohol, you might end up back there again. I'm pretty sure you probably wouldn't do it.
No way.
So I think it's even that. I think the fact that it's so important for you to try kind of identifies a problem of dependency for me. I hope that kind of makes sense to people. I'm not trying to stop people drinking, having a bad time. What our goal has always been is to try and help people stay off heroin and other drugs. And I think it's a similar thing in AA. That people often think, well, they can smoke marijuana and take medications. And again, this one story always sticks in my head about this one guy that, he had 5 years in recovery, he was doing all of the right things, and, he really was getting on in his life and doing great. But I did notice that he was drinking a lot of Red Bull, and he was drinking a lot of coffee, and he was eating a lot of sugar. And I could see that he was taking a lot of stimulants into his body, but also what he was telling me that he was getting up at like 12 o'clock at night, driving to work at 3 in the morning, smoking a lot. So he was taking a lot of stimulants into his body, and I tried, and then again he was getting headaches. So he was taking a lot of paracetamol and stuff like that. So even though he was not drinking and not taking drugs, he was using a hell of a lot of stimulants.
Mm.
And, one day, I tried to point it out to him, but he was quite angry about it because people think, well, I'm not doing heroin, I'm not drinking alcohol. What does it matter if I'm having 4 or 5 Red Bulls and 6 cups of double espresso and eating and smoking constantly? At least I'm not taking heroin. And they see that as a good thing. And a lot of people around them may go, no, well, at least it's not taking heroin or drinking alcohol. But for him, you could see that it was starting to become quite mind-altering. And then he phoned me up one day and he said, I feel really depressed and I feel really bad and really low. And I was convinced. I said, mate, I think you're having a stimulant crash. I said, what you need, come and stay in our centre for a few days. Just let detox you from all that stimulants. And but also I've got to say this, because it's an important part of the picture, is that I started to notice in conversations with him that he had real issues with his alcoholic father. And I don't know whether it was abuse or something like that, but I noticed that was becoming a bit of a sore subject as well. And anyway, he said, you're just fanatical about all of that stuff, and it's not that. My wife says I've got depression. And I said, mate, look, if you go to the doctors, he's just going to give you antidepressants. Now, the amount of times up to that point that people have said to me, I've got depression. And I've often said, look, how many coffees do you drink? And they're like, I don't know, 10, 15 cups a day. And I'm like, how many spoonfuls of coffee do you put in? They're like 2 or 3. So I'd get a jug of coffee and I'd put 30 spoonfuls of coffee in a bowl. I'd say, how many sugars you having? They're going like, well, 3. So I'd put 60 or 90 spoonfuls of sugar in a bowl. And then I'd say, how many Mars bars? And then I'd put 12, 15, 30, 40. How many Red Bulls? Put the sugar and the caffeine in the bowls. And I kid you not, mate, it is astounding how much coffee and sugar and nicotine that a lot of people in recovery are consuming. So to say that the word is clean, I know no one likes the word, but free from drugs it's ridiculous. It's like, mate, you're on so many stimulants, but to think that's not having an effect on you.
Yeah, that goes back to that idea of the hedonic set point, right? You're functioning at this like high buzz because you're just stimulated all the time, and then when you're not fully stimulated, you're down here, you're lower than your brain wants to be.
Yeah, so I mean, it's like you notice that in rehab, without a doubt, that when people come into rehab, their caffeine and nicotine usage goes up. A lot of people, they come in and start smoking because again they're trying to find a drug to be dependent on.
Mm-hmm.
And again, there's an argument, well, that's not such a bad thing. And it's like, well, that's an old discussion around the pros and cons of that. But it's where it leads you at the end of the day. This guy, he went to the doctors and then he phoned me up a little while later and said, you people in the fellowship, you're all a bit mad. I'm taking antidepressants and now I feel great. And it's like, but then you started to get the family saying, look, he's pinned. He looks like he's out of his head. And he's crashed his car twice. And the third time, he crashed it on a motorway in the morning on the way to work, and ended up breaking his back. And then he ended up on, and again, it's funny, I went to visit him in hospital. He's in hospital in traction, legs up, arms up. The first thing he said to me was, don't start talking about all that shit about stimulants. You know, he couldn't see that literally he was dumbed down so much by the medication and the stimulants and what it was driving him to do, that, you know, and everyone around him knew it, just no one was allowed to say it. And then now he ended up on all of the stimulants before, plus the antidepressants, plus Oromorph, plus DF118s, and his whole life's become about that. Now we're 20 years down the road, he's lost everything, and he's just stoned out his head on legal stuff and prescription medications.
It's the same model of the addict. It's just been moved to a socially acceptable and legal way of doing it. But it sounds like it's really the same problem.
Yeah. Well, to me, it is. So this is a thing, you know, why I believe in abstinence at some point, because I think them chemicals are mind altering, and that they're going to lead you down a path. And, you know, it might look like a step up now, but like Amy Winehouse, you know, if she would have carried on with heroin, she might still be alive. But because she started drinking copious amounts of alcohol, it killed her. That was the replacement. You know, so that, again, I'm not telling anyone stop doing anything unwisely, but just to consider. You know, again, with medication, it's always one of them things. It's saying, look, there's very little personal responsibility taken around it. I mean, you know, the question that I often ask people is, you know, have you even read the little bit of paper inside your medication? And a lot of the times they're like, no. There's literally zero.
You just trust it, don't you?
Yeah, there's zero personal responsibility. Well, again, I think you get a lot of people, especially with sort of drug addiction, that they think they're kind of immune to Valium and things like that. They can just take handfuls of it. They almost brag about it and proud of it, not realising that, you know, as a addiction treatment specialist, you realise it's probably one of the most difficult drugs to get people off is prescription medication.
Really?
You know, it's funny. You know, just writing that article this morning about children and marijuana is, you know, part of that. What I wrote in there is that one of the biggest problems about marijuana is that people say, oh, I'm only, or it's just marijuana. It's like it's not a big deal drug. And for a lot of people, maybe it isn't. But for some people, it's going to destroy their life. It's going to destroy their mind. And the same with prescription medication. You know, they're seeing it in America. It's not just me fantasizing or ranting. There's an epidemic of people on opiates because of the prescriptions have set that rolling. You know, whether drugs are from a dealer or a doctor, it makes the difference. If you're an addict, you're going to be using them for the wrong reasons. If they're using them for the right reasons, then fine. If you're using them for the wrong reasons, then go on.
I think that you know, that kind of goes full circle round to, you know, if you're drinking these non-alcoholic drinks and you're in recovery, then what's your reason behind it? You know, are you trying to capture some semblance of the past?
Well, that's where I was headed, mate.
Why are you doing it?
That's where I would kind of go with it with somebody that's doing it. Again, I like this bit in the AA book. And again, this is controversial even in AA, because I think people have a different mindset of what's right and what's wrong and their own opinions. But But, so they sort of say, oh, there was this saying when I first started that, oh, if you keep going in the barber, you eventually get an haircut, or if you keep going in the brothel, you eventually get a kiss. But I think what they were saying is that if you're an alcoholic or a drug addict, you should stay away from everywhere that there's drugs and alcohol. But that's not possible. I mean, that's why a lot of people cling to AA meetings and things like that. But then they lose their whole social life, which becomes a bit of an issue and a bit detestable to a lot of people, that by giving up drinking, you'd lose your social life. Now, when I first started, it was kind of like that. I mean, pubs were very different than they are now. Now you could, if I asked for a cup of coffee in a pub, 30 years ago, they'd be like, oh, well, it's either hard alcohol or Coke or something like that. And most of them didn't serve food, or very little food. It was just mostly for drinking. And especially the people that you end up hanging out with in your life, if you're a heavy drinker, you don't want to be hanging around with social drinkers because they're too slow. And so you really do lose your social life, which again is another topic that's really worth talking about, because it's a big problem for a lot of people. But in the AA book, it says this. This is on page 100 of the AA Big Book, they call it. It said, assuming we are spiritually fit, we can do all sorts of things alcoholics are not supposed to do. People have said we must not go where liquor is served. We must not have it in our homes. We must shun friends who drink. We must avoid moving pictures which show drinking scenes. We must not go into bars. Our friends must hide their bottles if we go to houses. We mustn't think or be reminded about alcohol at all. Our experience shows that this is not necessarily so. We meet these conditions every day. An alcoholic who cannot meet them still has an alcoholic mind. There is something the matter with his spiritual status. His only chances of sobriety would be some place like the Greenland ice cap, and even there an Eskimo might turn up with a bottle of scotch and ruin everything. Ask any woman who has sent her husband to the distant places on the theory he wouldn't escape the alcohol problem. In our belief, any scheme of combating alcoholism which proposes to shield the sick man from temptation is doomed to fail. If the alcoholic tries to shield himself, he must succeed for a time, but he usually winds up with a bigger explosion than ever. We have tried these methods, and these attempts to do the impossible have always failed. So our rule is never avoid a place where there is drinking, if we have a legitimate reason for being there. That includes bars, nightclubs, dances, reception parties, and this was in the 1930s, even plain old whoopee parties. I guess that's a piss up. To a person who has experience with an alcoholic, this may seem like tempting providence, but it isn't. So I think there's some important qualifications there that he's talking about. That, and I guess that non-alcoholic lager may include that. But the first check is it's saying that we're in fit spiritual condition, that we feel empowered, and that if we're going to a party or a wedding or anywhere, that we're not going to try and recapture anything or get close to. And that is quite profound, because when I got into recovery, I was on an island. There's only 400 people on that island, and there was only one pub. And if I didn't go to that pub, I wouldn't see anybody. There'd be no socialising at all. So, I had to go to that pub. But in my early recovery, I'd also drunk in that pub with the people. But I remember that when I used to go in that pub in my early recovery of abstinence, that I remember when I left the pub, in my memory, it was almost like I could see all the drinks moving around the bar, not the people. It was like I was so fixated on everybody's drinking. Even a couple of times when I was really losing it, I'd go in the bar, buy a large whiskey and give it to someone else and say, drink that for me. Just to get as close to it as possible. After a while, I realised one night I left the bar and I didn't remember any of the drinks. And, you know, some of them experiences, like I noticed, and this is a funny thing, this went on for years. If I see somebody drinking alcohol in reality, it didn't really bother me. But if I see somebody on telly, it almost like, it really it made my body chemistry change. And it made me feel like craving. And it was a funny thing that it didn't happen in reality, but it did happen in films. A couple of times I opened somebody's fridge and there was alcohol there, and it was almost like the alcohol jumped out the fridge into my face. You know, sometimes the desire to drink was so overpowering, I didn't know whether I'd be able to resist. So I generally would leave somewhere because, again, I think that qualifying that you're in fit spiritual condition, I think is a very important thing. That again, because I think that it says that the real miracle of this is that I'm an alcoholic who doesn't want to drink. Not I'm an alcoholic who does want to drink, but I'm going around trying not to. You know, don't get me wrong, every now and then the thought comes upon you. It would be nice to have a drink in the summer, like you said, and you know, you go to the bar when it's your round. You know, I'll get myself a sparkling mineral water, and I've got a tray full of, you know, lagers for everybody else, and it's hot, and you're looking at that head on the lager and the nice beads of, you know, running down the side, and something in you says, oh man, it'd be so nice to have a beer right now. But then something in me says, but you know what happens if you do? And it's like, yeah, you know what?
You can rationalise it.
Yes, which is again, that's the sign that recovery's worked for me. Because my sanity, where alcohol is concerned, anyway, not in every area of my life, but where alcohol is concerned, my sanity has been restored. So, you know, can I go in a pub and drink a non-alcohol free lager if I want? Do I think it would cause me any problems? Not really. I don't want to. You know, I'm not really keen on even, you know, eating food with alcohol in, because again, it's like I still think that, you know, I've got an allergy. I believe that I've got an allergy, and you know, even though I haven't had a drink in over 30 years, that's not true. I've had a couple of drinks by mistake. You know, over the years, probably maybe 3 times that somebody's given me a drink that I thought had no alcohol in, and it had alcohol in, and each time it was bloody lovely. but I also knew that I've got to stop my head focusing on it, about how nice it was, that it was just a mistake, that's not taking away my abstinence, and I should carry on being abstinent. Because again, you know, your head does often want to review. You know, you hear things, people talking. You know, do you think I could have a drink now? I've learned to control myself. I'm 56 now. You know, I've done a lot of work on my traumas and problems and stuff like that. So maybe it would be different. But again, I kind of look at it as an allergy. But more than anything, even if somebody, you know, even if there was a chance that I could drink alcohol again, I wouldn't want to take the chance.
Well, it's like you were saying earlier, you just wouldn't take the risk, would you? If there was a chance that it could all go tits up again, you wouldn't go for it. But it does make me wonder when you say about the allergy, because no, it's not worth it, is it? So some of those non-alcoholic or low-alcoholic drinks, they do contain trace elements of alcohol. A lot of them, they have 0.05%. So there is a little bit of alcohol in there. So it's whether that, you know, I don't know where that comes in with the allergy, if it's like a chemical thing or...
I'm not sure how true that is. Again, but in what I've heard over the years in these kind of discussions is that they have to put that on there, but whether there is or not, who knows? I don't know.
But I suppose it's less about the chemical and it's more about the idea of, in your mind, it being
I kind
equivalent
of
to alcohol.
think that again, this is why I like abstinence, because what I learned is that I could never control my drinking. That was the problem. If I could, I'd drink.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a lot of the harm minimalisation is helping people control their drug use or alcohol use. Now, if you can do that, then I don't think you're an alcoholic or an addict. I think you're a heavy drinker or a heavy drug user. If you can stop and moderate, then you haven't got the problem I got. The problem I got is I can't moderate it once I start. Now, I tried thousands of times. By the time I was 25, I'd come to the conclusion that I can't stop this and I can't moderate it. I never meant to get that drunk. I never meant to take that amount of drugs. But as soon as I started, I couldn't stop. And I think that's an important part of it. So, zero tolerance is kind of like abstinence is controlled. But the only way I can control it is by not taking the first one. It's like it's the first one that does the damage. So if I don't take the first one, I obviously can't take the second one. Now, the first one ain't the one that ultimately in reality does the damage. I'm not sure which one it is, whether it's the 10th one or the 15th one, but I'm never going to get there if I don't take the first one. And so I can do that. I can do the abstinence. But that means a lot to me. See, when I was early in recovery, I was kind of considered young. I was only 25. Now, a lot of the blokes in the AA meetings and NA and all that, they were all like 40, 50, and they were like old folk. And, they would say this. They would say, I've got another drink in me, but I don't know if I've got another recovery in me. And as a young man, I'd think, I don't even know what that means. I mean, if you have a drink, you come back to meetings again. But once you spend a few years in recovery and then you find out this really isn't an alcohol problem, this is a mental problem. This is a mental illness that I've got that really troubles me, the way I connect with this world, the difficulty of relationships, with managing my own emotional state, the traumas. I mean, again, this is another podcast that I like to do of what comes after recovery. It's not all pleasure and joy. There's some, I've been through and still can go through some serious traumatic emotional events, dealing with life, dealing with myself, dealing with situations. I really realised that this 12-step book and other philosophies and beliefs that I have is more about managing my mental and emotional state. The alcohol was really just a symptom of my disease. It was really just the self-medication for my problem. But when the alcohol was removed, I realised that I've got a far bigger problem than alcohol. But until the alcohol was removed, there was no way that I could deal with the underlying causes of my addiction. And so coming to that belief, realising that what them old timers were saying is recovery is a hard fought for thing. And I wouldn't want to give it up just for a non-alcoholic drink or go back drinking. So I don't think I would relapse if I started drinking non-alcoholic lager, but I want to 100% reinforce my abstinence because it's not easy. And I don't want to take any chances. I just don't. So again, it's not that important to me. That, even if they said, oh, we found a new tablet you can take, and if you take the tablet, you'll be able to drink again, I probably wouldn't take the tablet. It's like, why? Most people I know that can drink don't want to drink anymore anyway. Most people I know that shouldn't drink and don't like it. It's like, why is it that important? Why is alcohol that important to people? When it obviously can do so much damage, cost you a fortune, make you feel sick. Why is it that important to you? That's the question. And again, in my experience of people drinking non-alcoholic lager, not all, but enough to make me think if somebody's willing to go and do that, a lot of them tend to relapse again, pull away from they think they're somehow special and different. And again, I think, even in rehab, I learned this, is that, part of the program was making your bed. And, my friend taught me this, but it was my experience as well, that some people was like, well, how's making my bed going to keep me sober? And it's like, well, making your bed ain't, mate, but you thinking you don't have to is going to get you drunk. Because that's one of the hardest things to get through to people sometimes, that, look, you've got an illness and it needs a certain treatment. And whether you agree with it or not really doesn't make a difference. Apart from if you don't agree with it, you're not going to take the treatment and you're going to carry on relapsing and using. If you do take the treatment, you've got a good chance of improving your life experience.
Yeah,
so again,
it's that development beyond the abstinence as well, isn't it? I suppose it's not just the getting off the drug, but it's developing your brain to enjoy other things and to grow discipline and just to want to enjoy the normal things in life.
Yeah, and I think most of my friends that were drinking that didn't stop are dead now, and so I very much contribute the life that I've lived to my recovery. That if I would have carried on drinking, I would have had a very different life experience. So again, my recovery's got great value to me. And so I support that in as many ways as I can by keeping a zero tolerance on. So, I probably wouldn't choose food with alcohol in. But again, having said that, to be completely honest, if somebody made me something and, I'd probably, if it didn't taste too strong of alcohol, rather than offend them, I'd probably eat it because, again, I don't think that's going to cause me to relapse, which, again, may be a little bit of a contradiction in what I'm saying.
Well, I suppose what you're saying there is you've not gone out to seek that, though, right? That's the thing. You've not gone out and you've not bought brandy mince pies specifically because they're brandy mince pies. You've not hunted it down. Somebody's gifted it to you, and it just so happens to be the case. But if you're making that effort to replace it,
more than that, I would have had to come round your house and you'd have had to made a special dinner that you're really pleased with, and that by me refusing it would offend you. If it reeked of alcohol, I'd probably say I'm sorry. That's too. But if a lot of the time the alcohol burns off in cooking, but I wouldn't count on that. But under them circumstances, I probably wouldn't be that fanatical. But I wouldn't go cooking food with alcohol in or ordering it and that sort of thing. It would have to be an extreme circumstance. I think I was just trying to highlight. I don't think it's like you're walking on such a knife edge, but I think if you keep ordering the food with the booze in and eating, again, it's not even just I think this is the point. I mean, we are talking about sort of zero alcohol lagers, but it's not just that. It's like, again, it's all them other stimulants that the addiction creeps in. I mean, I used to say, go to an NA convention and see what they're all drinking, and that'd be the next best thing to drugs. And it used to be Red Bull that you'd go to conventions. I don't know whether they're still the same. I haven't been to one in years, but everybody's drinking tons of Red Bull, tons of coffee, smoking tons of cigarettes. They're still trying to get themselves high. And, I've watched that in lots of different people over the years and through my career, that how people have that's slowly crept up on them, like with medications especially. They start taking certain medications for the right reasons, and then they start taking them, instead of 2 every 4 hours, they start taking 4 every 2 hours. They start then seeking out prescriptions from other doctors, and slowly they start moving back into that using addict Um, and it can be a very slow over the years decline into that. People, drinking certain medications. I've gone to people's houses that I know in recovery and gone in their bathrooms, and there's just tons of bottles of night nurse everywhere. And I see them drinking the night nurse. I see them drinking mouthwash. Because of the alcohol. Codeine's a big popular one that people, they take a lot of codeine medications, or cocodamol, painkillers. They get a backache, and the doctors, the amount of times in my life I've gone to the doctors with problems. I mean, I made a complaint about the last one because I went to the doctors and was getting really bad headaches. And he said, "Are you stressed?" Well, I mean, in this world, I run a rehab. Yeah, I'm stressed. He said, "Well, do you want antidepressants?" I said, "No." He said, "Do you sleep all right at night?" I said, "Well, mostly. I wake up at 4 o'clock sometimes, but I don't consider it a big deal." He said, "Do you want sleeping tablets?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, what do you want me to do for you then?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I just feel like I've got a brain tumour or something." It's funny enough, they actually brain scanned me and everything and said there's nothing wrong. But what happened, my friend Sonja, she was drinking decaf tea. Now, I'd given up just about everything at one time in my life. I've been through the hippie stage, I've been a vegan, a vegetarian. I'd given up almost everything at certain points. I'd never give up tea. And so she said, "You can't tell the difference." So I thought, "Oh, do you know what? I'm going to give that a go." So for the next couple of months, I started drinking decaf tea and I did notice the difference. Still drinking coffee, like I have a couple of cups of coffee a day, and I noticed the headaches had gone, not because of the tea. And then I drank a cup of tea and I instantly got a headache, almost like a migraine. And I made the connection, that was the tea. And then I stopped drinking the tea again, the headaches went away again, so I give it another few weeks, drunk another cup of tea, like caffeine tea, and I instantly got the headache again. And there was something in the tea, but it weren't the caffeine because I did drink a couple of coffees a day. But since I've not drunk the tea, I've not had anywhere near the headaches. I was getting like 2, 3 a week. You think it's stress, you think it's tumours, all that sort of stuff. But it turns out it was the tea. But the doctor is like, one thing I've noticed about them, they never even asked you.
No, I was going to say, he didn't ask you about your diet, what you're eating. He just went straight to, let's just give you some meds.
Matt, they never do, mate. Look, I run a rehab, and whenever I do groups, I'd always do this. Because again, I knew that from my own. I'd say, look, if we took the Olympic team of England, now I don't think they're all necessarily well-adjusted people. A lot of them might just have OCD. I don't know. So I don't want to hold them up for being like mentally well people because, just because you're a good athlete, but they're the most healthy people and disciplined people. But so if we got our Olympic team and, for 1 month said to them, right, you're not allowed to do any exercise. Now, we just want you to drink a couple of Red Bulls a day, have 3 or 4 double espressos, eat some Mars bars, eat some crisps, have McDonald's every day, don't drink any water, drink, like fizzy drinks, Lucozade, nothing healthy for a month. Now we know that they're going to have a lot of physical symptoms. They're going to probably have headaches, they're probably going to have diarrhea, they're not going to be able to sleep because they're filling their body with stimulants, they're not exercising, they're not doing anything healthy. They're not really doing anything that most teenagers can't get their hands on in our country. But then I say to people, Now, if we sent them all back to their doctors all over the country based on your experience, and they're going to present with, well, the two symptoms that we're talking about is they're going to feel depressed, because depressed just means pushed down. Depressed doesn't mean they've got depression. They're just feeling depressed, which is, I think, is a very healthy emotion for most people, unless you've got some brain defect that's causing you to actually have depression. Most people are just depressed. But when you actually look at their life, it's like, mate, I think that's a very healthy emotion that you're depressed. I think anybody would be depressed if they were doing what you're doing and living the life that you're living. Depression is often a sign that you need to make changes in your life. But if you went back to the doctors and told them, I feel depressed and I can't sleep, they're going to give you antidepressants and sleeping tablets. They're not going to go, how many Red Bulls you're drinking. I think they're getting a little bit more like that. How many Red Bulls you're drinking, how much stimulants you're on, how much exercise you're doing. Well, no wonder you're depressed. No wonder you can't sleep. There's nothing wrong with you. They're very healthy emotions. You know, a lot of the time you get these guys, it's like, mate, you're shooting poison chemicals into your bloodstream. You're tipping unhealthy stuff down your throat constantly. Your parents are not that keen on you. Your kids don't like you. Your trainers stink. You've got no future ahead of you. Mate, if you weren't depressed, you'd be a psychopath. You know, the fact you're depressed shows there's nothing really wrong with you, except you need to make some changes in your life. And so that's the frightening thing to me, is that, you know, and then you ask them, people say, look, who went to the doctors at the worst time in their life? Who got prescribed high-powered sedatives? Who got better? Who got worse? From the perspective of people with addiction, they get worse with that medication. And again, even in this book that was written in 1939 or something, it mentions a couple of times. It says, and I went to the doctors who prescribed high-powered sedatives, and then the trips to the asylums began. Because then the doctors, and when I speak to the doctors and go, why are you medicating all these people? And they're like, well, I don't have enough time. I'm like, they're getting worse. Because now you're giving them medication that they're drinking on, that says quite clearly, in big black bold letters, do not drink alcohol.
And these people can't stop drinking alcohol.
I tell them not to drink. It's like they're alcoholics. They're alcoholics. You're giving them this medication. You're making them worse. Why are you making them worse? It don't make no sense. It just don't make no sense. And again, I think it contributes to a lot of the overdoses, accidental or intentional. It's a lot to do with medication. I think a lot of people overdose because they're taking heroin, and a lot of prescription medications that they're taking more than they should. And again, it's all right for someone to tell you, well, I told you not to, but if it was that simple, they wouldn't be in that position in the first place. So I do think society's doing a big disservice to people because it doesn't understand addiction.
Well, this is it. If you gave people the tools and the understanding, they'd be able to spread that message. And I know a big part of what they teach you in the fellowship there is to get sponsors and to sponsor other people and to spread that message. But if you're just giving medication, then there's no knowledge to spread there. What do? You say, I'll just go to the doctor, I'll give you some drugs. Whereas if you've got knowledge, then that's something that can be shared.
Yes, and I think even I think that's for most people. You know, doctors know that, you know, that they're medicating something that you're doing to yourself, and that most people won't actually do what's best for them, so then they end up on the medication. And so I think that's the problem with medication. It kind of gives you the peanut for doing nothing. So especially things like antidepressants, like that guy I was talking about earlier. See, when he first took them, medications, he definitely felt better. So then he contributed his problem to not feeling good, and the medication would make him feel better without him having to do anything, which we're kind of advocating the opposite, is that if you do things, you won't need the medication. But you are going to need help to understand what them things are, and you may need support in doing them. And so, that may include sort of meditations, being free from certain thoughts and emotional problems, but getting some therapy. We believe that there's things that you can do which will mean you won't need the medication. But we haven't kind of reached, I think society's just kind of getting to the top of that hill that it's going to start tipping over to realise, look, we need you to do things rather than just give you medication. Because the medication is just pain-killing nature. Because nature is telling you need to change, and we're just giving you painkillers so you can carry on ignoring it's like sticking the plaster on your engine warning light on your car. I think a lot of medication is, your oil light's flashing, and instead of stopping, getting some oil and putting oil in your engine, they just stick a plaster over it, which is fine. That solves the problem in the short term, but your bloody engine's going to blow up down the road. You're going to end up in a bigger problem. And I think, unfortunately, especially where addiction is concerned, most medications exactly like that. And so, it always gets a bit heavy when you're talking about addiction, and because it's a serious problem that I think is deeply misunderstood, and there's lots of different voices with different ideas. But, ultimately, I think that, the best reason for not drinking alcohol-free lagers is to just constantly support my desire to be abstinent. I don't want to get close to drinking. Doesn't mean I can't go to weddings, parties. I've got alcohol in the house. My wife likes to drink. I don't mind serving it. I'll go and buy it. If I have a party, I'll make sure there's plenty of alcohol. I can still see my alcoholic brain at work. I'm always worried, is it going to run out? My wife's family, they all like a drink, so Christmas, I buy loads of alcohol, and they probably have out of a bottle, they probably have about that much. So we usually end up with tons left, which usually ends up down the sink. My wife, like a glass of wine or something or other, and often she'll drink half the glass of wine and put the other half in the fridge and have it 2 days later or something. She drinks like I don't understand, but it doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me that I can't drink. If I could drink, we have this sort of a joke that says, if I could drink like other people, I would drink all the time. See, because I believe I am an alcoholic, and again, I think that's a bad name. But I think, because I think alcoholism is a mental condition, that alcohol is just a symbol of the disease. Mm-hmm. So to say that keep calling it alcoholic keeps trying to bring people's mind that this is an alcohol problem or a drug problem. It's not. That's the self-medication for the problem. So if I had a choice to have that problem completely taken from me so I could enjoy a drink like normal people, then that would probably be a preferable life. But like I said earlier, if they offered me a tablet now that said that I could drink alcohol, I probably wouldn't take it. I'm just saying that there is not the desire, it's a blessing to be able to drink alcohol in this world. I think. I think it's a blessing to be able to have a couple of drinks with your friends, that sense of ease and well-being that it brings. I don't get that. I don't get that anymore. That's something that I do have to give up. I know now that if I had a couple of drinks, I would get an amazing sense of well-being. I'd relax very quickly. I don't get that. That's something that, again, I'll have to give up because I know that it doesn't stop there for me, because I've not got the control that you have. That you can think, I'm a bit stressed. Again, writing this thing about cannabis this morning in children and young adults and teenagers, it made me think a way that I've never quite felt before, because there is a decline in young people drinking. But one of the reasons that a lot of people say they like a drink, well, why do you like a drink? What would you say if I said, what is it about drinking?
It would be relaxation and socialising.
Yeah, and for us, it was like blowing off a bit of steam as well. For people like me, for blowing off a bit of steam of the frustrations of life. But so I was sort of, as I was writing this article, it was sort of coming into my mind that young people aren't doing that as much anymore. And one of the great things about alcohol, which is why alcoholics use it, it's a great reliever of anxiety. So if you have a lot of anxiety, alcohol is a great reliever of it. Now, if you use it correctly, it can help you manage your stress. It can help you manage your anxieties, your frustrations, and every now and then you can get a bit drunk, blow off some steam, play the fool, but then get back to your controlled life. Now, that's not happening so much anymore. And the children are going over to marijuana and antidepressants, which are more drugs that subdue people. And again, what I've noticed over the years of talking in colleges and universities and talking to young people is the anxiety is growing as they become more antisocial on social media. Pubs are shutting down, meeting places are shutting down. Now, whether that's a combination of, the demonisation of alcohol and the trying to legalise cannabis in our country. But I think there's a lot to be said for blowing off steam. Now, there's probably healthier ways of doing it than alcohol. But if you're not doing that, you're becoming a pressure pot. And you're going to explode. Now, you can explode internally by mental illness, or you can explode externally and cause all kinds of other troubles for yourself. But I think that society becoming so controlled and so subdued and antisocial is going to cause a hell of a lot of problems for us in the future. I think
there's an awful lot to be said for things like exercise and particularly team sports, because like you say, you go through some physical hardship, which toughens you up a bit. You blow off some steam, you release some energy through some hard exercise. And if it's a team sport, or even if it's just a solo sport, like I like to do gymnastics, but you go to a centre where there's other people around you, you still get that social element. And if you don't have that, if you just sit around and play video games, you just you get antisocial. And I find it. I mean, I work from home now,
as well,
and a lot of the, if you don't see people, it gets harder to see people and you get more anxious. You need to make sure you're kind of jumping out your comfort zone a little bit, otherwise it's so easy just to collapse in on yourself, and the anxiety can just get worse. I think it can happen to anyone. If you don't keep on top of it, if you spend all your time with your head down in your phone and you don't speak to people in the real world, I think it's inevitable that you're going to feel anxious about going out and seeing people, and then that can lead to all kinds of problems.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think, the positive releases should probably be sports outdoor activities, sort of swimming in the seas, in the rivers, and sort of almost getting out and playing again. I was lucky growing up. I mean, we spent time climbing in the trees, riding our bikes, scrambling, swimming in the rivers, running around, mostly away from police, I've got to say, but we were a lot healthier then. So were the police back in them days.
Yeah.
I think the police are getting fat now because they're not chasing the kids around.
Yeah. Well, this is it. Like, there's something we have to just like stop playing because we need to start, working, and people don't have the energy, and then they just get distracted by, whatever is on the 2D screen. But we shouldn't stop moving, and like you say, getting out there in nature. I think if everybody went for a good long hike every day, we'd have a pretty different society.
Well, I think if you get your heart beating, and you can try it, if you get a lot of anxiety, obviously look at the stimulants that you're on, because that doesn't help. It doesn't help you sleep very well, and I think sleep is important to get good sleep. But if you do any exercise that just gets your heart beating, and again, even just running to your heart pounding, even just once, you'll notice. I wouldn't mind betting a 40% improvement in your anxiety, just getting your heart beating, because it clears your body. Exercise. They've noticed again this cold water. This getting yourself in icy water. For years they've noticed it. It's been made more popular by what's his face? The
Wim
ice.
Hof.
Wim Hof. It's been made more popular by him, but there's been great studies that show that getting your body into that freezing water, get that really releases a lot of hormones and cleans a lot of your system out from the constant worry that's building up anxiety in our bodies. So, and again, getting a little bit mentally tougher and getting a little bit of attitude, to life. Which is,
I think that's part of it, isn't it? You go through that hard, when you do a hard run or you do an ice bath, like you are met with adversity and you've got to overcome it. And it makes other smaller things that you come across day to day not that big of a deal.
No, which is all contained in a video game, but not authentic enough to have it's just good for your health, I don't think. I think definitely people need to get outdoors a lot more, and push the limits of your being to actually feel that you're really alive. I think there's a perfect storm brewing over the years of insecurity and lockdowns and health and safety and risk management. That the smaller the risk, the less the reward. And I think we've become such a risk-averse society that everybody's frightened to do anything. Now we're even frightened to upset anybody. So I think that's really very oppressive, and I think it does a lot of damage. Like I say, I don't think it's a good thing everyone going out and getting pissed on a Friday night and causing all kinds of trouble, but I do think that can actually give you a lot of relief. Again, I'm not recommending it, but there is something in it that you do have to push the boundaries of your existence to feel alive sometimes. I think that's what's reported of all the people that do that. Why'd you climb a mountain? I feel alive. Why'd you swim in a cold river? I feel alive. Why'd you run a marathon? I feel alive. So if you're feeling a bit dead, you're probably sitting around too much, which is pretty close to dead. Not doing much is close
it's
to
not
dead.
far off.
Well,
yeah, I'd love to get more into that on a. Go on.
Right now, I was just saying, it's like, so, all of this health and safety and reducing risk. I just think human beings like a bit of risk. I think it makes you healthier.
Yeah.
Not uncalculated.
I think it's that adversity.
God, even like driving is like, a lot of kids I shouldn't think and never can't afford to get a car. Never mind, they've got the ability to pass a driving test. I mean, I just can't see how, that was one of the greatest things in our life, was passing our driving test. But a lot of kids are probably not going to have the finances or the ability to do that. What are they going to do? They can't go to work with their dads anymore or mums because of their health and safety. They can't climb this, they can't go on that, they can't do this, they can't do that. I think it's really sad that when every bit of grass is like, don't kick a ball, and the only place
Mm,
to kick a ball is on a football pitch. That's long as there's enough insurance and trained professionals and you got the right equipment and had the right training. I wanted these lads in a supported living, and I had a load of wood to chop up, and they really were bored and looking for something to do. But I concluded I can't let them do it because haven't got the time to train them, haven't got the time, haven't got the money to get the insurance or get all the health and safety equipment that they would need to do it. So again, rather than them doing something with a little bit of risk, they're all sitting there doing nothing, rotting away. And I think there's far too much going on in our society. I think this over-regulation is causing a lot of mental health problems. There might be a lot less people dying on building sites, but there's a lot more people committing suicide and drinking themselves to death or sitting at home dying slowly in depression. So again, we need to evaluate risk, that people, especially young people, like a bit of risk. It makes you feel alive. It's depressing.
yeah,
It's depressing.
absolutely. And as you say, it's going to keep you alive as well. Obviously there's those unfortunate situations where things do go wrong, but they can go wrong at any time. But yeah, if you're sitting there living a sedentary life, and you're gonna die depressed. You might still die early, or you might end up turning to drugs or alcohol, or just getting depressed, getting put on scripts. So yeah, I think a bit of adversity is going to keep us all alive a little bit longer.
When I was young, there was a line in a film that we used to say, it's better to burn out than fade away. Now I'm getting older, I think it's reverse to that. So you better fade away than burn out. Well, it's like you've got young people. See, one of the saddest things I see in town centres is like them little metal things that they put in steps and to stop the kids skateboarding. And it's like I find that such a sad society that they drive the children out of town, and kids really want to show off. They want to show off to the other sex. They want the parents and the adults to be proud of them and encouraging them. And I think a lot of the time we push the children away from that, and I think that encouragement is what helps you grow up kind of healthy. So I'd much rather see the old people get out of the way and let the young people slide along the side of a wall in the high street, and I'd rather stand and watch them and applaud them. I noticed that kind of in Spain. I don't know whether it was a national thing, but I was walking down the high street in Spain, and there's all these kids kicking a football in the middle of the high street, but nobody seemed concerned. And I thought, man, that is kind of healthy. No wonder they got such great football teams. I think the skate park should be right in the middle of the town centre, so that the adults can keep an eye on the kids, but also appreciate them and applaud how wonderful and creative and great they are, and they can show off what they want to do. So I think you can be a bit, health and safety can be a bit dehumanising. But again, most of the people that are making the rules, I don't think have ever been on a skateboard. I don't know if there's something in that.
Well, that's it, isn't it? Well, that's it. It's like you say, it's not. And the people that are getting sued and
they've probably never rid a bike. They're probably very controlled in their upbringing and behaving themselves, and now they feel the need to control everybody else for our own good. Must feel great for them. But anyway, before I continue at this bland, over-regulated society that I've been subject to, unfortunately. So anyway,
well, I think we've had a great show today.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, it's been a fantastic show, and as always, I'll leave some show notes. We've got some articles on these subjects as well. Feel free to give us a call if you want to discuss things around addiction. We run a treatment centre, and we also have links with all sorts of rehabs all around the country for any kind of addiction or any therapy like that. So everything will be in the show notes, and if you want to get in touch with us, please do. So thank you very much, Lester. It's been great today. Enjoyed this one. First remote one, and I hope we can get lots of interesting people on in the future as well.
Yeah, to get some more guests. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and God bless. Take it easy.